What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to America Trends. Larry Rifkin along with John Kropsick. And John, you recall the one we did on weapons of math destruction.
I do, yes.
Well, we continue along those lines today. The invisible manipulation that's shaping our lives, the risks and rewards of AI. And it's really interesting because the gentleman we're bringing to you today, William Ammerman, is involved in programmatic advertising and where machines are really doing a lot of the work. My son is quite expert in that area and has a job in New York City working with programmatic advertising.
We should talk to him sometime.
I know. I should have my son on. But the big idea that William Ammerman is bringing to us today is that artificial intelligence is really changing us in ways that are unseen. So in the background of everything that we do online, we are sharing information, we're giving it up willingly, and we think there's no cost to any of this.
Oh, no.
But
Our
he extrapolates.
Is worth a lot.
Oh, yeah. Well, we are the product today. Big data really is the product. So all of
they're
these
feeding us what we want to.
Exactly. And then they're learning about who we are, and then they're sending back messages that they are pretty certain.
It's kind of spooky. I think it's really kind of spooky.
Yeah.
We got Google and what's the other one? Listening to us and learning about what we're doing in our home.
Well, Siri and,
yes.
Alexa.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're taking in all the data they can, and then they're returning to us things that we know we need. For example, he gives us a case, and I don't even want to get into it, but it's fascinating, and he'll work it back as to how a company knew that I needed new windows, for example. But we give all kinds of breadcrumbs along the way, all kinds of telltale signs by our trafficking on the web. And they are taking all of this in, processing it artificially, but through incredible computer capabilities. And then they're sending it back to us. And we say, gee, how did they know that? Or
That's
how?
Kind of spooky.
Thank goodness somebody's sharing this information. I needed it so desperately, and I didn't even recognize it. But they did.
Yeah, it's spooky. No, they know more about us than we know about us. It's really...
Well, William Ammerman,
spooky.
John, is a thought leader in this whole area, a real technologist, and he's going to pull back the curtain on this digitalization and this transforming industry in which the machines, not the marketers, have become the ultimate arbiters. And they know everything about us. They're customizing their tactics. They're prodding us to vote, to donate, to cry, to laugh, to purchase. It's pretty remarkable what's going on in our own little lives. So our lives are open to the world now, thanks to all these algorithms.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't know. I don't like the future.
Well, it's just about here, John. And you're a part of it. Let's be honest.
Oh, I know, but it's kind of spooky because it seems like the more we're connected, the more we're disconnected from each other, and it's really a sad state of affairs. So,
well, you say that, but think about it. You mentioned Siri, and then there's Alexa. The other thing that he points to is this whole new area that's called psychotechnology.
Oh, God.
Now, it combines these personalized messages,
yes,
human-like conversations, and he tells us a story at the beginning about a 4-year-old and an emotional connection to this that is just the foreshadowing of what we see here as we begin to feel these more human-like characteristics of these machines and how much more that embeds us into the culture that we're talking about, John.
Wow.
It's fascinating. Let's get on it.
Let's
The invisible brand. William Ammerman, today on America Trends.
With me on the line on America Trends is William Ammerman. He is the Executive Vice President of Digital Media at Engaged Media. But more importantly for us today, he has written a really wonderful book called The Invisible Brand, marketing in the age of automation, big data, and machine learning. And we'll try to break all of that down for you. Why the invisible brand? What are you trying to get at there, William?
I think people have a general sense that they are being watched, that they are being listened to, that they're being spied upon by their technology. But increasingly, we're talking to our devices. We're asking our cars for directions to the nearest Thai restaurant. We're talking to our television to get recommendations for a movie. And we have to be conscious that the voice that's answering us is not necessarily a fair-minded voice. It's a voice that has been put there by a force, an invisible interest, whether that's a brand or whether that's a politician, a government, an institution, that there are voices that are talking to us through our technology. And I think of that as an invisible brand in our lives. And I intended, by writing the book, to help people see it, to see something that's hidden, see something that's invisible, to cast a light that informs people about what's happening.
Well, let's go back, because you've worked for more traditional media companies, Hearst and others, and I have as well throughout my career. And in one sense, we went from editorial content and ads that basically were, sent out to everyone. And there was really a response loop, but it was very generic. Today, we're talking about customizing ads, individualizing media to such a degree, with such potency based on the technology, that there's so much information they're gathering on us, one might suggest that we are the product today.
And it has been suggested just like that. In fact, I think, to back up a step, it's important to, observe that we have moved from an age, when I grew up, everything was on broadcast towers. Everybody received the same 6 o'clock evening news. We listened to the same radio broadcast. We read the same magazines and newspapers. Today, each of us receives individualized, tailored information. So I like to say we've moved from mass communications to mass customization. The information you receive through your Facebook feed is personalized to you. The information you receive when you visit a website, maybe you check scores on ESPN regularly, you're going to see the games that are of interest to you when you go to the homepage. When I go to the homepage, I will see different games, different scores. So we're tailoring information to the likes and interests of the consumer, and that tells us a lot about who they are and what they're consuming on a regular basis and what they're persuaded by.
Absolutely. The only thing I would change in what you just said was I go to Bleacher Report, and they customize the teams and the scores that I'm interested in. And they're doing much better online than ESPN, one of the more traditional brands. And they're only about 30 years old. It's pretty amazing how quickly everything is changing. So we're talking about advertisers. We're talking about corporations. We're talking about politicians, all trying to get into our headspace and wanting to know everything about us, so in this loop they can send us back information that persuades us to vote for them, buy their product. As we look at it, what are the implications?
Well, you just narrowed down a few of the more critical paths. We're using artificial intelligence. In particular, we're using a feature of artificial intelligence known as machine learning to extract information from data, to detect patterns, and then to project forward what we want to accomplish and bend the outcomes, bend the curve towards the key performance indicators that we've set up. And so if that's collecting donations for a political campaign, as an example, if that key performance indicator is dollars in the bucket, we can start to see that when we change the messaging for this person, we increase the dollars in the bucket. And machines love numbers, particularly algorithms. They love numbers because it's easy for them to score things. So they start scoring the messaging. So they're delivering one message to you, a different message to me, another message to the next guy or girl. And what ends up happening is that they can start to actually see that some of these messages work better for different types of people. Maybe, people that like one basketball team versus one baseball team versus somebody that likes to fly fish versus somebody that likes to vacation in the Bahamas. We start to see patterns in the way they respond to different messaging. And by turning over that process to the machine, we become much more efficient. One human being couldn't possibly track the thousands and thousands of different variables involved, but a machine can do that easily. Predictive about outcomes, we're being prescriptive. We're changing the outcomes.
Interestingly, I was reading back in the 2016 campaign. Now, we know the Russians, however they got their information, whether it was the Trump campaign or otherwise, that they were trying to drive further schisms into the American electorate. And they knew what buttons to push because they had a lot of this information from hacking into systems. But on another basis, I remember reading about Ted Cruz's campaign, where he, in a granular sense, because of what you're talking about, knew whether a message about, say, Second Amendment rights that was focused more on self-defense would get my attention versus perhaps somebody whose history suggests that they love the outdoors, they hunted with their grandfather, and even though they both cared about the Second Amendment, let's say, they cared about it for different reasons, and you can really drive right into that sweet spot.
Yeah, so for politics, of course, we have a long history of using information about donors, about people that we know are, involved in campaigns to, motivate them, to get them to donate, to get them to rope in more people to the cause, so to speak. And we saw this both in the 2012 and the 2016 campaigns, where, in fact, Facebook was used. Originally, the Obama campaign bragged about the fact that they had been able to really leverage the people who are like the people that are, donating. And then, of course, that morphed and became a much broader outreach with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, in which, our data, the data that was about me, was expanded to include my entire Facebook group, so that the Facebook profiles of people well beyond the participants in that particular case, a survey, were included in the data set. So we expand these data sets based on who we know and who is like us. And by doing so, political campaigns can gain a lot of information, a lot of knowledge about what's motivating you. They can see that you are like this group of people, and they start to look for signals. What are the common elements between these people, and how can we tap into that and motivate them to change their voting behavior or motivate them to make contributions? It's really a stunning development in terms of how impactful it is on elections.
I know. If you think about it, William, somebody might have knocked on doors in the old days and said, well, I know you're a Democrat and I know you're a Republican, so I'm going to give you a little bit different message depending upon who I'm representing as a candidate. But now they can go to the person next door to another person and have information that, again, is so granular on them that their message just one door down can be so different.
It's genuinely startling when we start to personalize information, when we deliver not just advertisements, but actually the news you consume. So your Facebook feed is different than my Facebook feed, and a lot of people are starting to get their news from their social media. And when we look at that trend, we have to understand that it's not just one political message. It's the entire scope, the universe of information that people are consuming is being tailored just for them. We're in these little information bubbles. We're in these echo chambers where we're getting back information based on what we've expressed an interest in. So I'm only getting information that I'm interested in. You're only getting information that you're interested in. I have jokingly said, we're only reading the lies we like. And when we put ourselves into that kind of a filter bubble, it becomes very polarizing, and we really don't understand each other's perspectives because I haven't exposed myself to any of the ideas that you're consuming. You haven't exposed yourself to any of the ideas I'm consuming, and we look at each other like we're from different planets. It's really startling what's happening.
No, it really is. Very different than you work for Tribune and Hearst. When we sent a message out, and we were the gatekeepers, and we thought we had some editorial judgment that people should value because of our history, but the response was always much more generic than it was very express. and the information, as you say, was shouted out loud to many people, not individualized. Well, the book is called The Invisible Brand. William Ammerman is with us on America Trends. And William, I have to ask you this before we get into some of the trends that you see. The fact is, I had Kathy O'Neill on recently. She wrote the book Weapons of Math Destruction. And she said, beware of these algorithms because they're not built in just a petri dish. Somebody has to program those computers, and they have their own biases and their own set-asides as to their beliefs. So where do we generate the computer logic that gives us back the response that we may wish to use to persuade the same people that we know what it is that they want?
First of all, it's a great book, and I'm jealous that you know her. I actually read the book after I had finished mine. Someone who was a proofreader for mine said, "Hey, you should read this," and I enjoyed it very much. So let's kind of back up one step and kind of deconstruct the idea of an algorithm. An algorithm is simply a list of instructions that a computer follows, and we can get really interesting effects out of combining algorithms. So I'll give you a simple example. One algorithm might be waking up in the morning. And another algorithm might be getting dressed. Another algorithm might be eating your breakfast. You could actually think about the individual steps it takes to do all of those things as little algorithms. You can nest all of those algorithms in a larger algorithm called, My Day. You can even have those algorithms work competitively with one another. And I'll give you an example. Christie's recently auctioned off a painting that was painted by a computer, basically running an algorithm called a generative adversarial network, GAN, in which two algorithms work competitively with each other. The first algorithm paints, generates lots and lots and lots of different combinations of images, and the second algorithm judges. So one algorithm generates, and the second algorithm judges which of these paintings is most likely to be something a human being would buy at auction. So by combining these two algorithms, we get unpredictable results. We don't know what the result is going to be when it spits out a painting and says, okay, this is a truly unique work of art, and we're going to sell it for $40,000 at Christie's, which is in fact what happened. My point in telling that story, and you're tying it back to your friend who wrote the book, is that when we create algorithms, we don't necessarily know what kind of output they're going to generate. And when we combine them, we nest them, or we have them reciprocally work together to generate anything from a painting to a work of music to someday a full feature-length movie, we're not sure what the results will look like. And in the process, we have to be very careful that we're guarding against introducing unintentionally or intentionally biases into the equation. And that's a lot about what her book is about.
Absolutely. Now, some of the trends that you see in this whole area that we really need to be mindful of, and the book really helps us with that. So again, the podcast can't be a substitute either for Kathy's book or William's book. They're really important to read to understand the world that you're living in and the many influences on you. But you tell us, and I think it's 2020, that there will be more conversations with machines than with our partners potentially. So we know about Alexa, and we know about some of the other Google Assistant and others. Talk to us about voice activation and emotionality and what all of that is bringing into the picture.
Sure. I like to tell a story that I told in the book. I was invited over for cocktails at my neighbor's house, a lovely couple, both of them IBM executives, and I was having a cocktail on their back patio, and their 4-year-old son came and tugged on my sleeve and wanted me to, go follow him to show me something. And I didn't know what he was getting me into. I was worried it was a game of Candyland. But his mother kind of smiled and nodded and, suggested I should go with him. So with her reassuring nod, I got up and followed him into the kitchen where there on the counter they had purchased an Amazon Echo. And their son was 4 years old. He's on his tippy toes, and he goes up to Alexa and he says, "Alexa, play Star Wars." And, of course, Alexa dutifully responds, in 1977, John Williams, the theme from Star Wars, and it plays the theme from Star Wars. And he does this several times. And I was watching this, and as I was watching it, I was thinking, it's really amazing that a 4-year-old can navigate a voice user interface. Now, he's too young to read. A graphical user interface really wouldn't be as impactful. But he can navigate this thing with ease because, of course, we learn to speak between the age of 1.5. We're already working out language, whereas it takes us until we're about 5, maybe 6 years old before we can read with any fluency. And so this is a very innate thing. And while I'm having this mental conversation about what I'm witnessing, he leans forward and he whispers in the most kind of adoring, cooing voice, "Alexa, I love you." And all of my wheels in my head ground to a halt. It was my brain came to this screeching halt, and I thought, okay, this is new. This is different. We have reached a point where we are now having emotional relationships with devices. And I'll take you one step further. There was a recent study in which participants in the study were interacting with a little robot. And at the end of the study, they were told to turn the robot off. And the people in the control group just reached over and turned off the robot. The people in the study group were exposed to the machine pleading with them. It's saying, and the little robot said, "Please don't turn me off. I'm scared of the dark." And a startling number of the participants refused to turn it off. Now, that's empathy. They were projecting their own fear of the dark onto the machine. The machine wasn't afraid of the dark. It was programmed to say that. But we are all empathetically relating to our devices. And as we talk to them, studies are showing that the more we converse, the more that interaction is human-like, the more empathetic we become. And our empathy, in a way, is a hack. It's a means to persuade us. It's an opening that makes us vulnerable. And as we start to talk to our machines on a more regular basis, to our cars and our telephones and our television sets, the voices that are going to be talking back have an opportunity to persuade us in ways that we haven't experienced before in our lives.
And I understand that because there are times I'm prone to say thank you to Alexa for the weather report today, whatever it may be, and I feel badly that I'm not responding, even though this is not a human, or when I'm ordering a prescription from CVS or whatever it may be. And you tell us, of course, that artificial intelligence today, by definition, is narrow artificial intelligence. We haven't even begun to see what general AI means, even though we're reading about robots that are going to become partners, sex robots. I mean, you talk about emotionality. I mean, where is this headed and how quickly?
Well, yeah. Today, where we are today is still, as you say, in the field of narrow AI. We can solve problems. We can, sort a large table of data to sift out some relevant features within that data. We can actually paint a painting, but the AI isn't, turning into a robot that can seamlessly merge into society undetected, like in Blade Runner or Ex Machina. So, we're not quite to the science fiction, general AI robot that terrorizes the world. However, the narrow AI that we already have is pretty amazing stuff, and in some cases, it's pretty scary stuff. And I can understand how people have the, kind of feel like we've crossed the creepy line. So where we're going, think about, you mentioned, sex robots. Just think about dating. The world of dating is a world in which young people are increasingly pouring information about themselves into a dating service. And what that dating service is collecting is a lot of facts and information about your personality, how you're motivated, what you're into, what your interests are. That's a mountain, a treasure trove of personality data. And in turn, we're feeding back information about who you might strike up a relationship with and how that relationship might succeed. Well, we are giving that tool, that technology, a tremendous influence over our lives. We are giving that tool the potential ability to determine who we're going to marry, who we're going to mate with, who we're going to spend the rest of our lives with. that is a huge amount of persuasive capacity. And once we start to really deconstruct what it is that makes people tick in terms of their love lives, in terms of their interpersonal relationships, that's going to open up a whole new realm of persuasive capabilities, because we're going to really deconstruct the DNA of what makes your personality work. And it's really startling stuff.
Well, you tell us that this voice user interface will go from specific to open-ended, so we will be talking to them about lots of things in our lives. Maybe we'll be more intimate and more sharing with many of these machines than we are with another human. You call this, of course, psychotechnology. Get that term on the table for us.
Yeah, so I was really struggling to describe this to people. I thought hard about what to call it, because, of course, now we're dealing with, first we start with the personalization of information. Then we add on the fact that we've, added A/B technology, A/B testing technology to figure out what messages work best. And then we layer on natural language processing so that you're now talking to the machine that can figure out, it can learn how to persuade you using personalized information. And I asked myself, what do I call that? And I struggled. I realized I didn't have a word for that. And it was technology that operates on you psychologically. And so I put those together and I said, well, that's psychotechnology. And that's kind of stuck because we need a word to describe it so that you and I can have that conversation to say, okay, we're dealing with a new tool, a psychotechnology tool that we can talk to, but which changes the way we think, which alters our behavior, which interferes or meddles in our love life, that persuades us to change the way we vote. We need to have that word circulating in society so that people can say, oh, I know what you're talking about. That's called psychotechnology, and we should discuss how we feel about that and what the implications are for ourselves in our own lives and for our democracy and our society.
You do talk about the 4 distinct areas of innovation, and you have touched on them in this conversation. But if there's anything you want to amplify, the 4 folks are personalized information, and we did talk about that, the science of persuasion, and we're talking about that, machine learning, and voice-based interaction between humans and computers. Is there anything you'd like to emphasize further about any of those?
Well, I think that the most important part is that, this vulnerability that psychotechnology creates is something that is both an opportunity and a risk. And we need to educate ourselves more about it. And I'll say an opportunity on one hand, think about the opportunity to persuade people to change bad habits, to, give up, personal behaviors that are maybe destructive, give up smoking. If you're, suffering from diabetes, change your diet. There's a lot of things that we could use persuasive technology to help us with to make our lives better, to improve the human condition. On the other hand, and I'll use the example of China. China today is, of course, on the verge of cracking down on Hong Kong. But more importantly, and what I would say is even more frightening, is beyond their willingness to use force, is the fact that they're inventing or developing a social credit system which scores individuals based on their social behaviors and gives them rewards and penalties based on their performance against the criteria of support for China and the Communist Party. So if you say the right things and you behave correctly, you get more points. If you speak out and you're a dissident and you're in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party, a troublemaker, you lose points. Now, the points, in turn, become the tool, the mechanism by which you get housing and transportation, potentially food and clothing. And when I look at that, that terrifies me. So I see this technology as being disruptive, both in terms of really positive outcomes, great opportunities to, influence the world in a positive way. And simultaneously, we must be aware that it has the potential to be abused and misused in ways that create less freedom, that create suppression, and could potentially be leveraged by a totalitarian regime in very negative ways. And I think we need to keep both of those aspects of psychotechnology firmly in focus to ensure that we chart a course forward that is more on the positive side than the negative side.
Absolutely. These totalitarian regimes always used various techniques, but not with the sophistication and the power that the technology brings them. You remind us that in this early phase of technological advance in this digital space, that a lot of the power went to us. We can go online and we can use an online shopping mode, and therefore we can make it more difficult for our local retailers. They've got to really answer to us, lower their prices, whatever. But you say the shift is on from the power going from us, the consumer, with all of this data that they are going to be able to further manipulate us, and it's going back to the marketers.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very true. The concentration of information, gives the marketer a new form of power, and it's not just the kind of power that broadcasting and mass hypnosis, if you will, had on consumers. This is really very new because it's personalized down to you, and you may not even have any personal experience that it's happening to you. And so, as the equation shifts back to giving the marketers more power, we have to recognize that who are they and how are they talking to us? And we have to start to see that operating in our own lives. We have to understand that the influence is operating through the devices we carry around with us every day. I like to say that our phones have become the windows to our soul. It used to be the eyes or the windows to the soul. I think it's your phone. And I say that because I work in an industry in which I don't need to know your name. I don't need to know where you live. All I need to know is what you do on your phone to influence you. Your phone tells me where you go in the physical world. It tells me where you shop for groceries. It tells me that you golf on the weekends. It tells me that you go to the airport on a regular basis, which indicates you might be a business traveler. Your phone itself is all I really need to understand you. And that's a very powerful insight. That's something that I think people need to really understand is the device that you're carrying is how marketers peer into your soul.
Well, speaking of windows, why don't we close with an illustration? Because I think that's always helpful as people are trying to sort through the incredible information that you've provided today. And give us the story that you recount in your book of a fictional character, Emily, the Nest and the Invisible Brand, and new windows. You'll tie it together.
Sure. So, imagine that you're sitting on a Saturday morning in your kitchen, and you are online, and you're maybe drinking coffee, and an ad appears at just the right time to suggest that you should, seek out some energy efficiency to improve your home's value, to save money on electricity. And while you're sitting there, you're looking out the window, and you can see right along the side of your window that sure enough there's a gap there. You can actually it's wide enough that you can imagine dollar bills are passing through that gap, and your air conditioning is leaking out into the world. Well, the reality is that the ad that you're being exposed to was put there on purpose. Imagine for a second that the bank that you bank with watches your credit, and we know that you have enough credit available to purchase windows. We know your credit score. We know about how much money you have. We know that you just paid down some loans, and that would be a great time to approach you with an offer that might cost you $10,000 to replace all your windows, but you have an opportunity through a home equity line to actually afford that. And using the Google Home Nest product that tracks all of the devices in your home, we can see that your home is losing energy, and we can, by knowing the devices, we know that those are modern, new devices, so it's not coming from your washing machine and your refrigerator. There's something else that's leaking, dollars out through your energy consumption, and all of that together gives the marketer the ability to make conclusions. And in this case, the conclusion is you would be great as a target audience for marketing windows and replacement windows. So that ad is getting to you as a result of a collection of knowledge, your credit history, the appliances in your own home, your buying history, who you are as a consumer. And so more and more those ads are there very, very strategically targeting just you.
And speaking of Target, there's a great story in the book about Target and a pregnant young girl, but I'll leave that to you reading the book. The Invisible Brand, Marketing in the Age of Automation, Big Data, and Machine Learning. And we think we've given you some really valuable information today through the auspices of William Ammerman on America Trends. William, thank you for being with us today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
America Trends Podcast is part of the MHNR Network, mhnrnetwork.com.